So Dad built another house up in Johnson Street, 96 Johnson Street. I do remember that number. And that was a nice home too. And that was where the elders knocked on the door one day. These two tired missionaries coming up the hill, and knocked on the door. I didn't know who they were. There was a big veranda out the front, so they just knocked on the pole. They didn't come right in across the veranda to the door. And I thought that was nice. They didn't come and do that. I thought they looked nice fellas. And I was home on my own, and so I went out and talked to them. And they looked so, the perspiration was teeming down their face. It must have been around the hot area of the year again, I think.
It was December.
Because I remember I took out a cool drink for them. And just as they were going, they said, "Oh, could we have prayer with you before you go?" And I thought, they hadn't told me anything about who they were or what they were. And it was such a beautiful, touching prayer. I really felt the spirit of that prayer. And they said, "Oh, we'll call back again." And I said, "Oh yes, pop in sometime, you're coming past again." And strange to relate, they were back the next week, just popped in, and Dad by this time was working, building houses around the place somewhere.
I was putting a veranda on a place just up the road.
Is that what you were doing? And they had just come in and Dad drove up. And so they started to give us the discussions and tell us about the church. And I thought I felt a lovely spirit from these young men, but I hadn't listened yet too much to what they'd said. But as soon as they started to talk, Fred said, "That makes good sense. That's the best sense I've ever heard."
Did I say that?
You did. And I thought to myself, "Fred, I've never heard you say anything like that before." And so they gave us the one or two discussions, I don't know. They kept on coming back for quite a while. And
a couple of weeks.
Couple of weeks, was it?
Mm.
Then they invited us to church, didn't they?
Yeah, they wanted to make another appointment.
Oh, is that what it was? I forget.
And we said, "Well, we're going away for a few weeks."
Oh, that's right. Mm.
And they said, "Well, we'll give you a book to read while you're away."
But we said we're going at 5 o'clock in the morning because we'd arranged with Ron and Marjorie to go and do their milking to allow them to have a holiday. They'd never had a holiday, and they had 4 or 5 little children. And this was down at Morelanbar at the old farm. And so we had decided that we'd let them go. And so we said to the missionaries, to Elder John or Elder Hilliard, "But we're going at 5 o'clock in the morning." And where they were staying was way across town. And they said, "Oh, that's all right." So we got up to go at 5 o'clock in the morning, and here's the Book of Mormon lying on the front mat. They must have gone home, come back, and popped it on the mat. And so the 2 weeks that we were doing the farming for Ron and Marjorie while they were on holiday, we read the Book of Mormon between us, didn't we?
Yep.
15 minutes on and 15 minutes back. "Your time's up, come on, give it back to me." We were so absolutely thrilled with it, both of us, weren't we?
Mm-hmm.
It was absolute, it was like truth coming out of the pages at us. And we thought, where did this come from? However, can we find out more about this? And so we were a bit concerned that we'd never see these men again. They'd just given us this wonderful book and they'd taken off. No appointment or anything else.
We'd taken off anyway.
We'd taken off, but they didn't say they'd see us. And I was over at Mum's the next day, I think it was. And
day after we came home.
Day after we came home, round to Grandma's place in Fisher Avenue, and she needed something from the shop, so she sent Jeff down to get a bottle of milk or something for her, or something she needed anyway that she was out of. Jeff came back and he whispered to me, "Mum, those two men that left us the book are sitting outside the shop down there drinking a bottle of milk each." And I said, "Well, just go back and tell them to come round tonight again, will you?" Because Dad and I really needed to know. And they were round there all right. We had a lovely time from then on. They taught us and taught us and taught us. After a few weeks, months?
No, weeks, probably a
It
week.
was only weeks because we were baptised in 6 weeks, weren't we?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Oh, will you come out to church on Sunday?" And we said, "Oh, yeah. I said, "Where is it?" "Oh, well, we don't know yet." Well, you know.
We'll let you know.
We'll let you know. We'll let you know before Sunday. I thought that's the strangest thing I've ever heard. Anyway, they came back and they said, "Oh, it's just down your street. It's nice and handy." They'd rented the little hall just at the bottom of the hill there, the little Oddfellows Hall. So we went along on Sunday morning and sat down. And they were there. They'd swept the place out and cleaned it up, and they'd put these old-fashioned forms across a couple of them up. And so we went in and they greeted us, and they sat down and we sat down and we looked at each other, and they proceeded to open with prayer and sing a hymn and give a talk or give a... No, it was a lesson. It was Sunday school they started with, that's right. And I was waiting for the people to come, but there weren't any. It was so strange.
We were it.
We were it. So here's Fred and Gwynn, Jeff and Paul and Mark. Kent hadn't arrived yet. He wasn't born for another year. Was it a year later?
Yeah, probably.
Probably a year later Kent was born.
No, probably 2 years.
Yes, that's right, because, yeah. And we had
Catherine
born to us. And she just was premature and died the next day. And within the same year, that was 60, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Kent was born in December. That's right. So, anyway, to go on with the story of joining the church, for baptism, entry into the church, they explained to us we would need baptism. And of course everybody says, "Oh, we were baptised when we were babies." And then they had to explain to us that the authority was different when baptism of babies wasn't the thing. And we said, "Well, that sounds very sensible to us." And they explained tithing to us, and we said we needed to know how much was required and what was the right thing. By this time our faith in the Lord and our appreciation of Christ had grown to such a point that we were happy to feel the Spirit of the Lord with us. And we've enjoyed it ever since. So that was Southport. And 4 years, Dad was called to be branch president within 6 months of us joining, I think, weren't you?
Yeah, something like that.
And then it was about 3 years later that we decided we needed to get to the temple, and we decided to emigrate to Canada. By this time Kent was, no, it couldn't have been that long, because Kent was only 6 months when we went to Canada, wasn't he? So
yeah, only a couple of years.
We're not much good with our dates, are we, Mark?
It was 1960 Kent was born in.
We went to Canada that year. Following year, 61.
Yeah, we went in 61.
In June 61.
In June of 61. Well, we left in May of 61. We arrived in June of 61.
Travelled by ship.
Went on the Oriana. Kids had a great time, at least Jeff and Paul and
We've got
Mark.
photos of that too. We must find that one. It's on a slide. Is that all right?
Mm.
Yeah. And yes, the children enjoyed the ship and we enjoyed it.
That was a 2-week voyage, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 14 days from Sydney to Vancouver. We stopped off in Auckland and Honolulu.
And Suva.
And Suva, yeah.
Yeah, and Suva. Yeah.
Yes, I remember Suva.
And we ran into some missionaries that we'd met at our baptism in Suva. They were going home by ship.
On a different ship.
On a different ship. In those days, that was the way they would come from their mission, which was very different from today, wasn't it?
Yeah, the missionaries all went by ship then.
We didn't know anyone in Canada, but we just felt like it would be fine. We landed at Vancouver.
We told someone in Brisbane that we were going to Cardston, and someone there gave us a letter to Bob Sackley.
Did they? I didn't know that.
Who was living in Cardston, and we took the letter to Bob Sackley, and he said, "Oh, I know a bloke that needs a carpenter." He took me round to Ron Davis, and Ron said, "Yeah, you can start work next week." So I started work building a liquor store and work in National Park.
You always say that. You built a lovely guest house while you were there.
That was later on.
11 months we were there, and you built a beautiful guest house up in the Rocky Mountains.
Well, that was
for the Shell Oil Company.
That was the next job.
But he loves to talk about the Mormons building the liquor store.
We had an all-Mormon crew building a liquor store.
Well, there was no liquor in it then, was there?
Well, they moved it in before we were finished, and they had an armed guard there to keep us away from it.
That's a bit incongruous, wasn't it?
Well, they didn't know.
And so, at that time in the church, although we'd moved to a ward with how many in it did it have in Cardston?
About 600.
We were sealed in the temple in Cardston the day after we arrived. We'd bought a little station wagon in Vancouver, and we'd travelled over the Rocky Mountains, went along the American side and up across the border and up through to Cardston that way. And
I remember stopping in right at the top, at the pass, and playing in the snow. I think that might have been the first snow that we'd ever seen.
On a slide, so that would be a good one to put in, Mark, about the snow going over. Because you boys couldn't believe this first time you'd seen snow, you tropical lot.
I remember it well.
Do you?
I do.
It was a hot day too.
Yeah.
And yes, it was midsummer, and it was very high pass. It must have been to have that snow still lying there. And so we came down into Cardston, and oh, it was so hot. We stayed at a motel, and it was no fans, no air conditioning, no nothing, just heat beating down on the roof. And somehow or other, someone had got word to Brother Sackley, and it wasn't us, because we still had the letter in your pocket. Bang, bang, bang on the door of the motel. And he greets us with open
I hear there's some Aussies here, he said.
And he and Marge Sackley, she was a North, and they were a beautiful family. And Bob says, "Oh, we've got to get you out of here. You can't stay in this place." So he's out hunting for half a house to rent. That's what we decided we could start with. The first one he found was in the top story of an old Canadian colonial, way up steep steps into this double story with the old people down the bottom. And it was you could see for miles out. It was so high. And the boys would go out to play, and I looked down from a great height and saw them down in the grass, way down playing in the backyard. And but it was so hot there, wasn't it? And so we looked around for something to buy for ourselves. And we found a little house with a lovely outlook at the temple. It was just a block in the block. One block.
2 blocks away
Two
from
blocks
the
from
temple.
the temple and the chapel. And so we thought that'd be nice, and we bought that place because we had enough money from the home we'd sold in Southport.
Had a beautiful garden.
It was full of vegetables. The backyard was literally full of vegetables, and that's the way the Canadians did it, and the Americans probably. And so I had all these sisters coming to show me how to can everything. Recipe books coming at me from all angles, and all the help I needed to show me how to can things. Because I'd never canned before, I've got to admit that. It was bottling, it wasn't canning, and but they called it canning. And so it was a happy year in Canada. All the boys loved Canada. They enjoyed
Especially Jeff.
Jeff helped the neighbour boys to build
The canoe.
a canoe, and the Rasmussens lived next door, and they had a horse. Remember the horse, Mark? And they played in their barn. They had a good old-fashioned barn with a horse and cows, and it was so good for the boys to have a little bit of country nearby, and they'd sleep out overnight. I remember them sleeping out in the, this was while it was still the hot summer, I think, because you slept out, Mark slept out too, I think, and it was the most interesting sight to look out the back of the kitchen window, and it was long grass in their paddock out the back of their house where the horse was and the cows, and here's like grubs unwinding daylight in the morning, the sleeping bags, one here and one there and one there, with the neighbours' boys and our boys all unwinding out of their sleeping bags at daylight. And it was a lovely sight to see, because the boys' ages, the Rasmussens, were equivalent to you three. Remember, there was Monty, there was David, and what was your friend's name? There was one smaller anyway, about Mark's age, and so they did enjoy that. Mark got very ill while we were in Canada. For some reason or other, he had an incredible redness come over his body and incredible fever, and I think it had all the symptoms of scarlet fever actually. And once again we called on Bob to come up and give him a blessing, and he says, I'll get Dr. what was his name?
Can't you hear the doctor's name?
He was the state president, I think.
Yeah.
To come and have a look at Mark, and because I'd noticed his urine had blood in it, and I was really concerned. And the doctor came and went to hospital immediately. And so he was. He said, "This is dangerous," and so he was in hospital for 2 weeks, I think he were, and he recovered, thank goodness. And the only qualification was don't let him get chilled for a year or two until you see how he goes, because his kidneys could have been badly affected. They didn't have all the testing equipment in those days, so they had to be. So Mark was very, very cross at the thought that he couldn't go out and skate on the ice and do the things quite so much as the others, but you still enjoyed it, didn't you? And then came this telephone call from Salt Lake City. Somehow or other, there were builders needed in Europe to cover the part of Europe with chapels. To put the prophet knew that they would be required in a few years, and so there were builders called from all over. Anyway, the call came to go to Scotland.
I was at work and they called you, if I remember rightly, and wanted me to call Salt Lake when I got home from work.
That was it, yes, yes.
And I called and talked to Brother Mendenhall, and he said, we'd like you to go to United Kingdom to build chapels.
We'd only had the house 10 months, I think, hadn't we?
Oh, I don't think it was that long.
We're just starting to settle in.
And I said, okay, well, how long have we got? I said, we'd need at least a month to get ourselves organised. Okay, he said. And
when
our tickets came. We had 2 weeks.
We had to sell the house, try and get rid of all our things, because there's a limit to how much you can take with you.
Because we wanted to go down to Salt Lake, so we took off and went down to Salt Lake in about 3 days, I think, there and back, something like that. Stayed down there a day and come back again.
We somehow had the feeling, I don't know why, that we needed to finish up our business there in Canada, didn't we?
Yep.
But we wanted to go to Salt Lake first to see what it was like. Not knowing, of course, that it wasn't just a 3-year mission, which it was supposed to be in the first place. So we flew across the North Pole. I can still look out the window and see the icebergs floating. Can you remember that?
I think I might.
You were all thrilled to bits about that, about the excitement of life from then on, except when you were in school and the kids all picked on you in Scotland. Because by then you'd acquired a Canadian accent, you see. And I don't think they'd have liked Australians much better, but it was a very rough town, was Kirkcaldy. Most people were out of work. It had been a linoleum.
Coal mining and linoleum.
Sorry?
Coal mining and linoleum.
Coal mining, yes. The coal mines went right out under the North Sea there. But there were some good people while we were building the chapel to help. There wasn't many in the ward. There was only one priesthood holder in the ward. But some of the workmen took Dad out on their boat fishing, and the boys, and some of the contractors, that was. The building was built by voluntary labour. We had building missionaries whom we were responsible for and who hadn't done any building in their life before, whom Dad taught how to build. And somehow or other it got done, didn't it?
Yep, 17 months.
It took 17 months to build, but it was a lovely building. Mark E. Peterson was the apostle that came and dedicated the building. And we both had spoke, didn't we? And I had my young women. I had 3 young women. I was Young Women's President by then. And they sang for the meeting. And it was a beautiful chapel. Some of the schools that the boys went to were, the first one was a hard one. Knives were worn by the children. Jeff and Paul were in the best grammar school in the town of Kirkcaldy, and yet they had to escape by climbing over a very high wall twice to be saved from the knives of the other boys, just because they were foreign. And I phoned up the headmaster and I said, very nicely, did you know that the boys at your school carry knives? And actually our boys had to climb over the wall. Oh, Mrs. Curtis, he said, they've got to grow up, haven't they? I'd never had this kind of reaction from a headmaster about this subject before, but that was just one incident. I think they improved from then on. It was just that it was a very rough town, and it was very hard because the out of work system, there was a lot of lounging people around, a lot of drinking and family troubles and all sorts.
Okay, from Kirkcaldy we went to Kilmarnock, which was the next chapel we built. That was in Ayrshire in Scotland. Took us about 18 months to build that. And then I spent a lot of time after that just travelling around the country tidying up things that were left undone by American supervisors that went home and hadn't, as soon as they finished the building, it hadn't quite finished off all the bills and what have you.
Because they'd spoken to you about staying on by then, hadn't they?
Yeah, they asked me if I would. The 3 years were up then, and they asked me if I'd stay on for another year to get things sorted out. As an employee, no, I wasn't an employee then, it was just to stay on for another year as a missionary, which we agreed to do. After that, another year, they asked me if I would stay on as a church employee, which sounded pretty good to us. I had to earn some money after not having any. Now the next job was a chapel in Coventry, which was where Jeff met Margaret, and their friendship blossomed into marriage eventually after Jeff's mission. We didn't finish Coventry because I was asked to go into the area office as assistant area supervisor, which meant that I travelled all over England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, supervising the various projects that were underway.
Our home was in Leeds at that time.
We had moved to Leeds then.
So it was central
Which was
England.
more central. Then Ron Davis went home and we had a new area supervisor came who was Rudger Dent, and an American, and he wanted me to move down to Epsom to be in the office there, so we had a closer contact, which we did, and we from there I travelled all over England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales again. While we were in Leeds, I used to have to go down to London every second Monday morning for a staff meeting, so I used to leave about 4 o'clock and drive down to London to be there by 8 o'clock for a meeting.
Rain, hail or snow.
Some mornings you couldn't hardly see the radiator in front of you on the freeway. But
You never had an accent, did you?
no, I don't know why. I used to get on the motorway and there was cat's eyes all down dividing the lanes, so I would straddle the cat's eyes between the fast lane and the centre lane, and I would follow those cat's eyes sometimes at 80 mile an hour in the fog and hope there was no one in front of me, but I always seemed to manage to get there in one piece. After we'd been there for, I guess, a year, Rudger Dent had brain cancer, and he was operated on. He had to go home, and they brought over another guy who was, I better not mention that.
No, don't. He soon went back again because he was not.
He wasn't there long. He wasn't up to the job.
Up to the job, and
between when he came and when Rudger Dent, and when Rudger had to go home and when this new guy came, I was running the British area with the assistance of some of the other guys.
Our children were a mixture of Canadian plus Scottish plus English. And so, yeah, and they picked up the languages wherever we went. Within a week of being there, I could hear them speaking with the Scottish boys outside the window, and they were all almost as broad as the Scottish kids. So you go on, Dad. You're doing a great job. We met Margaret, and Jeff and Margaret were married in Epsom before we came home to Australia. And little Gaynor was born in Epsom, so we had the privilege of our first grandchild in England, didn't we? And from then on it's been in Australia.
Jeff and Margaret went to Canada just before we came back to England. We came back in September of '71.
Went to BYU, Idaho.
Jeff went
Idaho.
to BYU, Idaho. And then the brethren came over and asked me if we would come back to Australia
Because they needed to have
and manage the Australian area.
They had
Because they'd had Americans here all the time before that. And I was the first Australian to manage the Australian area
building
department, which was operated out of the house a church owned in Manlyvale.
1971.
September 1971 we came back and there was bushfires and it was hot.
But it was Australia and it was home.
We were home. All the people talking funny. After being in England, and they thought we were talking funny. We lived in the house at Manly for about 9 years, I think, and while I was managing the building department from there.
And from that home, Paul was married to Joanne, and Mark's first marriage took place while we were there, didn't it?
Yeah, from there we moved into the Commonwealth Bank building in Sydney, North Sydney, for area office, when the area office was expanded to have finance and operation and maintenance and numerous other activities in there, which was a bit of a change from me running the whole show. But, and then after a couple of years in there, they split the area up into north and south and east and west or something like that. You know, we moved to Melbourne and
we wanted to get out of the city by that time. Dad had found that it was very frustrating in the area office after having done half the activities of the others himself for so many years. It wasn't really easy for him to adjust.
We were under the thumb of New Zealand was the problem.
New Zealand had the financial department at that time, and your problem was that you were not getting your bills paid to the contractors because of the mail situation between New Zealand and here. Anyway, Dad said, I'd like to get out in the field again. And so
we went to Melbourne and I looked after the Victoria and South Australia and Western Australia for
and it was nice.
A couple of years.
It was nice.
Mum was secretary.
Secretary to you I was 2 years. I learned to type at the TAFE. I did that in Manly actually.
We bought a house in Lilydale. And
from there Kent went on his mission to New Zealand from Lilydale.
While he was on his mission in New Zealand, we moved to Deer Park. Not Deer Park, where was it?
Oh, across to the west there.
That was Werribee.
Werribee. Yeah.
Mm.
We bought a house, sold the Lilydale house and bought a house in Lilydale because I had then decided I had enough of managing the whole show.
Office work, etc., etc.
So I went back out on the projects, which I really enjoyed. I worked at Geelong and Ballarat, Deer Park.
Yes, your last building was the Deer Park Stake Centre, wasn't it?
Down there.
We came up to Brisbane and supervised 6 buildings in the Brisbane area, didn't we? Which were they? Can you rattle those off?
Oh no, I can't remember them all.
Anyway.
It was Tweed Heads and Cleveland and
all that era.
A bunch of others anyway.
But it turned out to be a a really nice time for me, because it was by this time Mum had passed on and Dad was living at home on his own. Marge and Colleen were going around each day to help look after him, so I took my turn every 3 days. I'd go down and stay with Dad for the day, and we talked a lot together, and it was nice. And as it happens, we were still up in Brisbane when Dad passed away, so it seemed like everything in our life has been somehow the Lord has blessed us and looked after us, and it has worked out. So we feel that it hasn't been our thinking all the way, that things have worked out fine.
So the last job that I did for the church was a small chapel at Nowra.
Nowra, that's right, down the coast, yes. And that was
while we were there, we bought the house at Wentworth Falls.
Bass Road,
Wentworth Falls, and we moved up there as soon as we finished the job at Nowra.
When you retired, Dad retired.
He retired in October of 1987. We lived there for a while. Did a bit of touring around in a caravan.
We did a lot of trips in the caravan. We had the caravan on the Nowra job, and we lived in it on the job there, so that we'd have it for when we retired. And we did a lot of good trips.
Then we got a mission call to go to the Manchester mission in England. And before we got there, we were shanghaied by Elder Sackley and Jack Hoare to go to London and work on the 1881 census on the mission there. We spent 18 months there. Again, we travelled all over England and quite a bit of Scotland and Isle of Wight and the Isle of Man.
It was really nice. We did meet a lot of people that we'd known when we lived over there. Dad knew how to drive on the roads beautifully, but we did visit a lot of places that we really hadn't had time to visit when we were working so hard on them. But it was possible.
We were assistant to the manager, I suppose you'd call him.
And so it was quite legitimate to visit the people in the societies, family history societies, who were doing the transcribing of the old records onto paper. And that was a combination church, non-church effort, the whole thing was. So we had a lot to do with the non-members there, and invited into their homes with meals, and we really enjoyed. So that was part of our job, to go and enthuse them up, to keep their people going with their transcribing, and to collect what they'd done and bring it back to the headquarters.
Sometimes we used to go and speak to the family history societies to get them fired up to keep the work going, so we could get it done in time. We did quite a bit of that.
And then when we came home, we moved down to Paul's property, didn't we? We sold. It had been such a...
We did another mission first.
Well,
we sold the house at Bass Road.
We sold it so we wouldn't have to rent it again.
And we bought a bigger caravan. And we lived in a caravan park while we served a mission in family history in Sydney.
Oh, that was right, sorry. Yeah. Which was again to do with family history, this time sending out the films all over Australia to the various places that had requested them for loan. So, yeah.
And after that, we lived in the caravan again while we built one of Paul's cottages.
Yeah.
And when that was finished, we lived in the cottage.
And that was a
until we built our home.
Delightful experience in the cottage in the mountains, and something a little bit different. And we did enjoy that. until our house was built in the corner of the property there. But it was something different and something very nice. So we lived there until Paul sold the property just a year or two back. And
we rented a house for a year while Kent built his house, and we moved in there.
Now we're living with Kent and Rachel in a flat on the side of their home. So
at Kellyville.
At Kellyville, Castle Hill.
End of story.
Sydney. So that's us, and we're up visiting.
I suppose we should have said that we were called to the temple presidency,
which we served
as
3 or 4 months.
As second counsel, and Mum as assistant matron for 6 months until Mum got ill and had to have some major surgery done, and we had to be released. And now I work as a sealer in the temple.